My name is Sarah. I am 28 years old, and my life turned completely upside down when I discovered that the woman who was supposed to be family had committed the ultimate betrayal against me. I was standing in the dusty, dimly lit aisle of a local pawn shop, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, staring through the scratched glass of the display case. There they were, my custom wedding bands, the physical proof of my marriage, sold for quick cash. But the real shock did not come from seeing my diamonds sitting next to cheap watches and old guitars.
The real nightmare began when the old pawnbroker leaned over the counter, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and hesitation, and decided to reveal the whole truth. He told me he knew exactly who had brought them in 3 days ago, describing my own mother-in-law perfectly. And then, slowly, he reached under the heavy wooden counter and showed me her. Before I tell you what he showed me and how this entire nightmare unfolded, I want to take a quick pause to ask you something. I always love knowing how far my stories are traveling and who is listening to them across the country. So please, leave a comment below telling me from which city and state you are hearing this right now. It really warms my heart to see all the different places you guys are from. Now, to make you understand the gravity of what happened in that pawn shop, I need to take you back to the beginning.
I need to explain how the tension in my family grew so incredibly toxic that it led to the sudden disappearance of the most precious things I owned. My husband, Mark, who is 30 years old, has always been the absolute love of my life. We met in college, and we built our lives from the ground up with nothing but our own hard work and dedication. We did not have rich parents to buy us a house or pay for a fancy wedding. Every single thing we owned, we earned with our own sweat. But there was always a dark, heavy cloud hanging over our happiness, and her name was Brenda. Brenda is Mark's mother, a 55-year-old woman who never believed I was good enough for her precious son. From the very first day Mark introduced me to her at a family dinner, she made it her personal mission to make me feel small, inadequate, and completely unwelcome in their family circle. She possessed a unique talent for destroying my confidence with a simple smile, constantly making passive-aggressive comments about my career and my cooking to make me feel completely inferior. When Mark finally proposed to me, he did it with a stunning custom-made ring that he had saved up for over 2 entire years to buy. It was not just a piece of jewelry to me. It was a tangible symbol of his sacrifice, his deep love, and his unwavering commitment to our future together. When we eventually got married, we added a perfectly matching wedding band to it. Those 2 rings never left my left hand. They were my most prized possessions in the world. Brenda, of course, hated them. At our wedding reception, she grabbed my hand, looked at the diamonds, let out a loud sigh of disapproval, and muttered that it was a terrible shame Mark wasted so much money on rocks when he could have helped her fix the roof of her aging house. That was classic Brenda, always making everything about her. A few months ago, Brenda called Mark late at night with a desperate sob story. She claimed her house had a severe plumbing issue, water everywhere, and that she needed a place to stay for at least a week while the expensive contractors fixed her broken pipes. Mark, acting on pure instinct, said yes immediately. He did not even bother to ask me first, which caused a rather heated argument between us that night. But I eventually agreed, because I did not want to be the evil daughter-in-law throwing her husband's mother out on the cold street. So, Brenda packed her bags and moved right into our guest room. From the exact moment she walked through our front door, the energy in our house shifted drastically. It felt heavy, tense, and suffocating. I knew it was going to be a long week, but I tried my best to keep the peace. It was a Thursday evening, just 2 desperately awaited days before Brenda was scheduled to finally pack her bags and go back to her own house. I had spent the entire afternoon deep cleaning the house, scrubbing floors and doing massive loads of laundry. I was physically exhausted. Before taking a hot shower, I did something I very rarely do. I took off my wedding rings. I usually wash them with a special jewelry cleaner once a month, and I had left the small bottle of liquid cleaner on the bathroom counter. I placed the rings gently inside a small porcelain dish right next to the sink, fully intending to clean them as soon as I got out of the shower. But when I turned the water off, over 3 hours, typing away at my keyboard until my fingers cramped, finally managing to save the project just past midnight. Exhausted beyond belief, I crawled straight into bed in the dark, trying not to wake Mark. I woke up the next morning feeling a very strange, cold sense of emptiness on my left hand. I rubbed my sleepy eyes, looked down at my fingers, and my heart instantly dropped violently into my stomach. My fingers were completely bare. A wave of pure panic washed over my entire body like a bucket of freezing ice water. I threw the heavy blankets off the bed and sprinted barefoot down the hallway to the bathroom. I stood there breathless and stared at the porcelain dish on the counter. It was completely, utterly empty. I froze in place, my breathing becoming incredibly shallow and fast. Hot tears started streaming down my face as Mark walked into the hallway, looking incredibly confused and alarmed by my frantic crying state. I choked out that my rings were gone, my voice trembling with uncontrollable fear. He immediately dropped his work briefcase and rushed to help me search. We spent 2 agonizing hours ripping the entire house apart. We checked the garbage cans, the vacuum cleaner, and the pockets of my clothes. Nothing. It was right then that Brenda casually walked out of the guest room, leisurely sipping a hot cup of coffee with a perfectly calm, undisturbed expression on her face. She looked at our mess, raised an eyebrow, and asked what all the ridiculous noise was about so early in the morning, acting completely oblivious to our intense panic. When Mark frantically told her my wedding rings were missing, she did not gasp. She did not offer to help. Instead, she let out a short, incredibly cold laugh. She looked right at me and said that is exactly what happens when people are careless with expensive things they do not deserve. Her reaction was so incredibly cold and completely devoid of any basic human empathy that a dark, terrible thought instantly planted itself deep in my mind. She was the only other person in the house. She had used that exact same bathroom later that evening. I pulled Mark aggressively into our bedroom and whispered my terrible suspicion to him. I asked him, with my voice barely audible, if he thought his mother could have taken them. Mark looked at me as if I had just slapped him, getting instantly furious at my accusation. He yelled at me, saying she could be difficult, but she was absolutely not a criminal. He demanded to know how I could even accuse his own mother of such a disgusting crime. I felt completely and utterly isolated. My husband did not believe a word I said. My precious rings were gone, and the woman I strongly suspected of stealing them was sitting comfortably in my living room watching morning television. I grabbed my car keys and practically ran out of the house. I drove straight to a local coffee shop and called my best friend Jessica, who was also 28 years old. I was sobbing so uncontrollably hard, I could barely form a coherent sentence. When I finally managed to explain the entire situation and Mark's angry reaction, Jessica did not hesitate for a single second. Her voice was pure steel, completely validating my darkest fears. Jessica told me I was not crazy and that Brenda absolutely took them. She reminded me how much Brenda hated that Mark spent money on me. She then gave me the best advice of my life. She told me to start checking all the local pawn shops. People who steal jewelry do not keep it in their purse, Jessica explained. They sell it immediately for quick cash. Her harsh words made terrifying logical sense. I wiped my tears away, drank a large bottle of water to calm my nerves, and started searching on my phone for every single pawn shop within a 20-mile radius of my suburban home. The next 2 days were an absolute living nightmare. I visited over a dozen different shops, walking alone into dark, strange places, showing pictures of my rings to grumpy store owners who looked at me with heavy suspicion and shook their heads. Every time I heard the word no, it felt like a dagger to my heart. Brenda had gone back to her house on Saturday, acting as if absolutely nothing had happened, giving me a fake tight hug and telling me to be much more careful next time. By Monday morning, I was exhausted, deeply depressed, and running on 0 sleep. But there was one last shop on my long list, a small, old place on the edge of town called Arthur's Gold and Silver. I parked my car in front of the shop and took a very deep, shaky breath. The brass bell above the door chimed loudly as I walked inside. The place smelled strongly of old paper, polished wood, and metallic dust. Behind the glass counter stood a man who looked to be in his 60s, carefully wiping down a silver tray with a soft cloth. This was Arthur, a 60-year-old man. I nervously approached the counter, my hands shaking violently as I pulled out my phone to show him the picture of my rings. I begged him to look, my voice cracking with pure desperation. I watched his weathered face incredibly closely as he looked at the screen. I saw his eyes widen slightly and his jaw physically tighten. He looked up at me, then back at the phone, and then he sighed a very deep, heavy sigh. He told me to hold on a minute, turning around and walking slowly to a large metal safe at the back of the store. My heart started beating so incredibly fast, I genuinely thought I was going to pass out right there on the floor. Could this really be it? A few agonizing moments later, he returned with a small plastic evidence bag. He placed it carefully on the glass counter under the bright overhead light, and I gasped violently. I slapped both my hands over my mouth to muffle my loud sob. There they were, my custom engagement ring and my wedding band. They were actually safe. I nodded aggressively, tears streaming down my face, confirming they were mine. I begged him to tell me who brought them in. Arthur looked very conflicted, stating he buys things fairly, but I cut him off, explaining through my tears that they were stolen from my own bathroom by a family member. Arthur looked at my desperate, tear-stained face and finally gave in to his conscience. He described an older woman with short blonde hair and an expensive purse who came in 3 days ago. It was Brenda. The physical description was absolutely perfect, but Arthur did not stop there. He leaned over the counter, his expression turning incredibly serious and dark, revealing he knew her well. He told me she had been coming there for years, and then he reached under the counter and pulled out a thick black ledger. Arthur opened the dusty book and flipped through several pages before stopping at a section heavily marked with Brenda's real full name and her state ID number. He explained she was one of his most frequent sellers, but she never sold her own things. He pointed his thick finger at the long list of handwritten transactions. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the lines. My blood instantly ran completely cold. There were dozens of entries dating back many years. Gold cufflinks, vintage baseball cards, a heavy silver pocket watch. My mind raced in absolute horror. I instantly recognized those specific items. Mark had spent years crying over those exact things, believing they had been lost forever. They were his late father's most precious belongings. I felt physically sick to my stomach. She had not just stolen my wedding rings. Brenda had been systematically robbing her own son for years to secretly fund her hidden lifestyle. Arthur pointed to another column in the ledger, noting she always demanded the cash in large bills and constantly mentioned needing it for the casino boats down by the river. It all clicked together in my brain with terrifying clarity. The constant complaints about money, the sudden desperate need to stay at our house, the missing family heirlooms. She was a severe gambling addict, stealing from her own flesh and blood to feed her sick, twisted habit. My rings were just her latest desperate payout. I looked at Arthur, my vision blurring with tears of pure rage. I needed absolute proof to destroy her. I told Arthur my husband would never believe me without undeniable proof. Arthur nodded slowly, fully understanding the gravity of the tragic family situation. He made clear photocopies of the ledger pages, showing Brenda's signature and the list of stolen items. He also allowed me to take a high-quality picture of the pawn ticket for my rings, which clearly showed her full name and driver's license. I paid Arthur the exact amount he had given her to get my rings back legally. The drive home was a blur of pure adrenaline. I called Mark and told him to invite his mother over for dinner, lying that I wanted to apologize for accusing her. I spent hours preparing dinner, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I hid the folder with the photocopies and the pawn ticket right under my placemat,
ready to expose her entire fake reality to my husband. Brenda arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, looking incredibly smug, wearing a fake smile that made my stomach turn. She sat at my dining table, eating my food, loudly praising me for finally coming to my senses and admitting I was just an unorganized person. I smiled tightly, watching Mark happily chatting with her, completely blind to the absolute monster sitting right across from him. The tension inside me was building up like a massive volcano ready to violently erupt. I took a deep breath, put down my fork, and looked directly into her eyes. I told her softly that I did not lose them. The room went dead silent. Before Mark could scold me, I reached under my placemat, pulled out the heavy folder, and slid the photograph of the pawn ticket right onto her plate. I told her I found them at Arthur's shop, along with her signature. All the color instantly drained from Brenda's face. She looked like she had just seen a terrifying ghost. Mark grabbed the paper, his eyes scanning the document rapidly, his voice trembling as he asked his mother why her name was on a pawn ticket for my rings. Brenda started screaming, her hands shaking, claiming it was a fake and that I was framing her because I hated her. But I coldly slid the photocopies of the ledger pages across the table toward Mark, telling him to look at what else she sold over the years. Mark read the detailed descriptions of his father's silver watch and his childhood baseball cards. His eyes filled with heavy tears as the brutal realization finally hit him. He looked at his mother, his face twisted in pure agony, realizing she had been lying to him his entire adult life just to feed her sick addiction. Brenda was completely cornered. She burst into loud, theatrical tears, finally confessing about her massive casino debts, begging Mark for forgiveness, swearing she was going to win it all back one day. But Mark stood up so fast, his heavy wooden chair crashed violently to the floor. He looked at her with crushing, absolute disappointment. He told her she stole the only things he had left of his father, and then she stole from his innocent wife. With a terrifyingly calm voice, he ordered her to get out of our house immediately. Brenda sobbed loudly, but Mark simply opened the front door wide and told her never to contact us again. She grabbed her expensive purse and ran out into the dark night, crying hysterically. Mark shut the heavy door and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I sat next to him, holding him tightly. It was one of the darkest, most painful nights of our entire marriage, but it was also a massive turning point for our future. The toxic, manipulative presence that had been poisoning our relationship was finally gone forever. In the weeks that followed, Mark started going to intensive therapy to deal with the profound betrayal from his own mother. We changed all the locks on our doors and completely cut all contact with Brenda. We later heard through distant family members that she eventually lost her house due to her massive, uncontrollable gambling debts and had to move into a tiny, rundown apartment across the state. She faced the ultimate consequence for her actions. She lost the only son who ever truly loved her, ending up isolated, broke, and entirely alone in the world, just as she deserved. As for me, my beautiful rings are back exactly where they belong, safely sparkling on my left hand. Every single time I look at them now, I do not just see the love between Mark and me, I see a constant reminder of my own fierce strength. I learned the hard way that family is not just about blood, it is about respect, trust, and absolute loyalty. You cannot allow toxic people to destroy your peace just because they share your DNA or the DNA of someone you love. Standing up for myself and uncovering the ugly truth saved my marriage and protected our future. I absolutely refuse to be a silent victim in my own home, and taking that firm stand changed everything for the better. We are much stronger now, completely united as an unbreakable team, and finally free from the dark shadow of her lies and manipulation. Looking back at all the intense pain and the crazy investigation that led me to that dusty pawn shop, I realized I had to go through that nightmare to finally expose the truth.
I protected my family the only way I knew how. Now, I want to ask you something deeply personal. If you were in my shoes and you discovered your own mother-in-law had stolen your wedding rings to fund a secret gambling addiction, would you have exposed her in front of your husband like I did, or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments below. Until the next story.